It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Joining us, France 24's Catherine Norris-Trent. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, François.
It's been a busy week for Silvia Ayuso, Paris correspondent for Spanish broadsheet of record El País. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Want to welcome Aude Baron, editor-in-chief of Eurosport.fr.
Hello, François.
Thanks for joining us. And thanks as well to Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report.
Greetings, François.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. # World This Week. Third time in a little over 3 years. It's a familiar drill for Spanish voters.
Between the two options, doing nothing and carrying on without a budget, or convening to give the Spanish people a choice, I choose the second. I propose the dissolution of Parliament and announce a general election for the 28th of April.
Silvia Ayuso, how do you feel about the prospects of new elections? What's this all about? Why are the Spanish going back to the polls?
Well, there's been uncertainty since the elections in 2015, and now it was obvious. I mean, it was clear that Pedro Sánchez had only 84 deputies, in a Congress that has 350, so it was extremely difficult to govern. They tried, they made a government. They always said they wanted to end the legislature, which is 2020, but it was. I mean, they've been jumping from crisis to crisis, and now after the refusal of the budget, they had no way.
Why did that budget get refused?
It's been, we go back to the old story, Catalonia. I mean, the Catalonian independent parties that helped Pedro Sánchez in the motion of no confidence and brought him to power against Mariano Rajoy, retired their help, so they...
Is it a question of bad luck because we had the opening of this trial of these 12 separatist leaders over that banned 2017 independence referendum the same week that the budget's being voted on? If it hadn't been the same week, would they maybe have wavered?
It's very difficult to say. I mean, this is the Catalonia problem, whatever you want to call it, has been the constant for the past 2 years. So there's no way to talk nowadays about politics in Spain without the Catalonian question. And now the big fear, the big question mark now is that we have a new panorama where a new party has emerged, the ultra-right Vox, and which is also in a way a consequence of the Catalonian debate that has opened up the doors to, it's ended the taboo on the far-right speech that there was not yet in Spain due to our past. We've had a long time dictator, but now it's been a normalization of certain discourses, and the ultra-right has come strong. They've managed to change the government in Andalusia, and they're hoping, and everybody thinks that they're going to they're going to have deputies. So that's for me the biggest danger right now.
The biggest danger. We'll talk more about Vox in a moment, but first, the idea that there's a sort of Catalonia effect on all of Spanish politics. There was the start on Tuesday of that trial, and we noticed this stark contrast between the former number 2 of the regional government, Oriol Junqueras, in the dock. As the proceedings began, he could face up to 17 years behind bars for rebellion. And then there's the exiled former Catalan president who was posing at a peace gala at the Berlin Film Festival. Carles Puigdemont in exile. He hangs his hat in the Brussels suburb of Waterloo, Catherine Norris-Trent. Separatists we've been speaking to, they say, oh no, it's different ways of getting our message across.
Right. Well, he's obviously decided he's going to stay there in exile in Brussels and not go back and face those charges, and perhaps a way of, being more accessible perhaps to international media. I mean, I don't know that it looks that good on him not coming back to face justice when he's got, former colleagues for the independence movement in the dock. But anyway, that's the choice he's clearly made there. And it just seems very difficult to see how this situation is going to be resolved, because I've been there a couple of times reporting, not since December last year after regional elections there following the independence referendum, and it was just so clear how divided that part of the country.
And how little,
For a lot of
even
the
after
countries.
those elections, not much changed, right? You had roughly this.
Yeah, a few seats here and there, but it's been deadlocked. It's been deadlocked for a while. So what is the way out of this? And I mean, no easy solution really. And once you have a referendum like this, as I know from another subject we're going to be talking about, there's no real way back. It just divides countries and regions like that.
Yeah, and the start of that trial, the question everyone was asking was, is it a political trial? The Spanish government handing out press briefings this week at several of their foreign embassies saying, no, this is the law, the justice is blind, this is the judiciary, it's not a political trial.
Well, yeah, I mean, by the letter of the Constitution, it may not be, but the political context is intensely political. I mean, it was about a referendum that was opposed by the central government in Madrid. It was twice.
It was. If you keep by the law, it was a referendum that was not constitutional and according to the Constitution. Then you can discuss whatever, and they knew it was unconstitutional. So after that, the reaction might be discussed.
I guess it was the overreaction that a lot of outsiders
or
saw.
the strategy to go through the judiciary way instead of the political way, and the dialogue that endangered everything.
I think the tragedy is that a lot of outsiders saw Sanchez as someone who was going to be moderate enough to talk to the Catalan movement. We all understand that Catalonia itself is divided on the question of independence, maybe 50-50, we don't know exactly. But he was beginning to sort of like put out feelers for some sort of negotiation around the issue of autonomy, more funding for the region and so on, and things like that. And now this sort of budget faux pas, and then the election has driven a coach and horses through that.
All right, the needle didn't move much for those regional elections that you mentioned. Polls suggest that the socialists could gain ground in that April 28th general election in Spain, but the far left Podemos could lose seats. And then there's what Silvia was mentioning. You see the outgoing parliament here in this graph, and of course the far right Vox is not in there, Aude Baron.
And what's very interesting is to see how Vox has emerged on the political scene, because at the very beginning of Vox, the media considered it was too small, to be considered as a topic in itself. So this political party, they just grew on the social networks. And when you see today on the social networks, and especially on Instagram, Vox is the most followed party on Instagram. On Instagram, which is quite amazing.
Why Instagram?
Because they have almost 2 million followers, and just because they care about the social networks. And for many political parties, being on social networks, it's kind of a duty. You have to be there because everybody is there. The difference with Vox is that they understood that it was a huge power of communication. The other party, they work with the journalists, they work with information, whereas Vox, they create their own media, and as they're not listened to, they don't have, they didn't have enough attention in the other media, so they created their own, their own platforms.
Yeah, and again, El País, broadsheet of records. What's your reaction when you hear that here's this political party that's completely bypassing newspapers
but
like this?
It's the same question as we had, as media in the US with Donald Trump. Did we overreact? Did we create the Trump effect because we were reporting, the media, mostly the American media, were reporting every single tweet? We have a bit of the same problem in Europe with Italy. We have it even with France, and we have with the Front National, or just Rassemblement National now, that they tweet a lot.
The far left, which has its own YouTube channel.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but I wouldn't say that. I have no. I don't know how much he followed the France Insoumise. But the thing is, when do you start to cover a political party, and do we create it, or is it our fault or not? It is a big. But the thing is that they've emerged. There's also there was a space, and it's quite new in Spain. We've had quite short democracy, 40 years, and for over 30 years there were mainly two parties that were sharing power. And now there's a new, after the crisis, there came new parties. It started with the left, and then
financial
with the right.
crisis of
financial
2000.
crisis, which was especially hard in Spain, and we were living a new situation, and these parts, there's not so much political space. So it's quite new for Spanish politicians as well.
And in Spain, the three people who are responsible of the development of the web communication of Vox, they had they were inspired by Trump's team. So they saw that Trump's emerged thanks to social networks, so they just copycat it.
It's almost like Spain is the last domino, because it was the one power in Europe that didn't seem to have this polarization of far left and far right, and a lot of rabid nationalists. Can we call them racists, Fox? They seem to be in the racist category, don't they? I mean, it was the last country to be safe. It's pretty safe from that.
And picking up on what Silvia was saying, Catherine, here you have a country, a big center-left bloc, a big center-right bloc. Now you have, since the financial crisis, first the emergence of Podemos, the far-left group, Ciudadanos, the liberal group in the centrists, and now the far-right.
Absolutely. It's a fragmentation of the political system, which has been seen in other European countries, and it's clearly a process where people feel the traditional parties no longer represent them. They don't want to go down the whole centre-left, centre-right divide. They're tired. They're exploring other channels, and you get sometimes single-issue parties or parties focusing on one main cause, which pick up a lot of traffic using social media, but they tap into some discontent that things haven't been working for people they feel in the traditional sense of politics, that nothing's much changed. Perhaps it's about living standards as well. I mean, clearly, going back to what you said about the financial crisis hitting Spain very hard, that's got to be part of it. But it's a trend, I think, which will only continue, and really, who knows where that will finish.
And also the emergence, I mean, I don't want to accuse the Catalan independent of being the responsible for the resurgence of the far right, but it's open. It's broken a taboo in Spain. I haven't been living in Spain.
Is that the taboo, or is the fact that you had the Conservatives and Ciudadanos who agreed to go into a coalition with Ciudadanos in Andalusia?
Of course, that's political opportunism. But the thing is, when I haven't been living in Spain for over a decade. And in Spain, the number of flags you see that might be very normal for countries like France that are very patriotic, but in Spain, the Spanish flag was a symbol of the right. I mean, there were things. So there were some symbols, and now everybody, you go still to Madrid or to any city and you see flags everywhere, which is a symbol that there's been a normalization of a discourse that it used to be more moderate and more hidden. I mean, people didn't dare, because of our past, of expressing these very extreme positions. And this I'm not saying that everybody that hangs out or uses a flag is an ultra-right. What I'm saying is that there's been a normalization of some discourse that has helped emerge more radical discourses. And this is something that happened in reaction on Catalonia. I'm not saying that Catalonian independents are responsible for that. I'm saying that this started with this as well as with the crisis. I mean, and the Catalonia problem started also in a way as a response to the crisis. So,
speaking of the turbulence experienced by European parliamentary democracies, come in London.
The ayes to the right, 258. The noes to the left, 303.
45 votes the margin as the House of Commons Thursday rejected a measure offering a symbolic backing for Theresa May's Brexit roadmap. So, with 42 days to go and the Prime Minister reportedly insisting that it's her sacred duty to meet the deadline for leaving the European Union, what does the rest of the EU make of it?
Well, I think we were reminded again last night of the reality that the House of Commons isn't clear in terms of what it wants. There doesn't seem to be a majority of MPs asking for anything specific.
Fortunately, Patrick Smith is here, and he's going to tell us what those MPs want.
Which set of MPs? I've never seen British political culture so divided. The left is divided, the right is divided, the centre is divided. But so what you can get out of the vote this week is simply that it was a very modest proposal. The Prime Minister went to Parliament and just said, just give me a bit of time. You voted for me to go back to Brussels and try and get some deal on the so-called backstop, the exception that Britain wants to have without joining the customs union, staying in the customs union permanently. And they said, fine, go back to Brussels and negotiate. And then two weeks later, she has another vote, and they say, no, we don't really, we're not really going to give you the backing. What she is trying to do is quite clear, is to run the clock down and wait till the last minute, the end of May, March the 29th rather, before taking a vote. In fact, her chief advisor, civil service advisor called Ollie Robbins, was overheard in a Brussels cafe by another journalist from ITV News, and he was saying, look, that's what she's going to do. She's going to take it till the last minute after the EU summit on the 20th, 21st of March, then go for a vote in Parliament and say, if you don't go for it now, if you don't go for my deal now, my backstop deal, then we're going to have a very, very long delay. I think the best guess now is we're in for a very, very long delay.
You hear that, Aude Baron? It's going to run till May.
Well, this is what we're hearing, and what's very interesting. I'm focusing a lot, on social networks. It's when you see the reaction on the social networks, and you just have the impression that from now, people who are against the Brexit, they understand, they reacted, them also at the very last moment, and especially on YouTube. We were talking for Spain of Instagram, and for the Brexit, you see many stuff on YouTube, and especially medias or NGO who are publishing videos, and those videos we don't see them in the mainstream media, but some of them they are seen millions and millions of times. And you see also the company TED, and they've published many speakers, many videos.
But they've had TED Talks about Brexit?
Against the Brexit.
Against Brexit?
Against Brexit. And
Okay.
there is one TED Talk who was released last autumn, and it has reached 2 million views. So, but unfortunately it appeared, only a few weeks or a few months ago. Whereas the people pro-Brexit, they've started battling,
Before 2016.
Yeah, before, yeah.
Right. We won't look as far as May, but here at the World This Week, but we will take a look at next week's agenda. The Brexit minister, Stephen Barclay's to meet EU negotiator Michel Barnier on Monday. The Frenchman will then receive opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn on Thursday. Corbyn's star power seems to be rising in Brussels as leaders there search for anyone who can break this deadlock. But how popular is Corbyn these days in his home constituency of North London, where opposite Arsenal's football stadium, advocates of a second referendum spray-painted this billboard, Catherine Norris-Trent?
Right, well, there's a huge split here between the leadership of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, and John McDonnell, his right-hand man, the Shadow Chancellor, who are kind of in favour of Brexit, although not Theresa May's version of Brexit, and the grassroots, some of the grassroots of the Labour Party, who are adamantly opposed to Brexit. They would want a second referendum. They say it openly. And they're really, really putting pressure on Jeremy Corbyn to say, well, if we can't get a deal, we can't get a general election, let's hold a second referendum. And we may be seeing some resignations coming in the Labour Party and a split because they can't hold this. The Labour leadership, Jeremy Corbyn, is terrified of losing voters in the UK's former industrial heartlands up in the north and the Midlands, if he doesn't deliver Brexit, if he's seen to go back on that. So he's really stuck between a rock and a hard place. So he's basically putting forward another proposal saying, look, I've got an idea about a better kind of Brexit. But he really, I think, wants someone else to do Brexit, and then he can come along later and say, well, I wouldn't have done it like that. He just doesn't want to lose votes, and he's desperately trying to hold his party together. But I think something's going to give, really.
Something's going to give on both sides, it seems. When we come back, we're going to take a look at Nigeria's challenges ahead of a tense presidential election, and also the sexual harassment scandal that's hit French media. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. France 24's Catherine Norris-Trent is with us. So is Silvia Ayuso, Paris correspondent for Spanish newspaper El País. Aude Baron, editor-in-chief of Eurosports.fr. And Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of The Africa Report. The Africa Report's set to roll out a digital edition.
Indeed, yeah. Next month, and probably Nigeria and South Africa are going to dominate the first few days of reporting.
Well, let's talk about Nigeria. Campaigning is over. ahead of Saturday's presidential election 4 years ago. The losing incumbent conceded in the first peaceful transition of its kind in the country's history. This time, everyone is on tender hooks, fueling the sudden suspension of the Supreme Court justice. He appeared in court earlier this Friday for a case that's been adjourned to March 11th over alleged failure to declare assets. Walter O'Nogan's jurisdiction is precisely where a close vote might end up, Patrick Smith.
Yeah. I mean, it's 3 months ago, it looked like it was Buhari's to lose. And then he just made a series of unforced errors, the latest of which is this suspension of the Chief Justice. And to most Nigerians who follow the intricacies of the court, as you say, because the court is going to be the final arbiter if there's a dispute about the election, and let's face it, there's likely to be a dispute, almost whoever wins. And to suspend him for a wrongful declaration of assets, he underestimated his personal wealth by about 90%, it is said. Fine, but to do that
it's the
3 weeks before the election, it looks incredibly suspicious. So it's gone down very badly. Foreign diplomats have condemned it, and indeed a spokesman for the UN has condemned it as unnecessary, adding tension to the fuel. So you've got a situation with Buhari as a kind of nationalist, former military leader, talking about defending the system, making Nigeria work, versus Atiku, who's pretty much a barnstorming, populist, free market sort of guy, facing a lot of allegations of corruption. But people say in Nigeria, there's this phrase, Atiku grows money. At least the guy's made billions of dollars. So the economy at the moment's in the doldrums. So if we put him in charge, he might just supercharge the economy and we'll all get richer. You know, the rising tide that should raise all boats. But it hasn't happened very well in Nigeria in the past.
And a very different atmosphere surrounding the campaign when you compare to 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not much idealism this time. I mean, at least in 2015, Buhari, and he was surrounded by these young, quite dynamic politicians. They were technocrats. They had some vision of breaking the hold of the old PDP, which was a sort of, you know, Nigeria's version of the institutional revolutionary party in Mexico. They've been in power forever. And they came a cropper. Buhari beat them hollow. And there was great hope that he was going to change things. Unfortunately, he just didn't. The mechanisms, the bureaucracy, the concentration of power in the center didn't really allow the reformers to get a grip on the place. Plus, it was damaged by a massive recession and fall in the oil price.
Aude Baron, we're in this lull between the end of the campaign period and the start of voting. And it's the same problem now all over the world, right? Where you have... within the country, you're not allowed to campaign, but everything seeps through on social media. And we've had these pledges by the social media titans not to allow as much false advertising or false targeting of voters. It seems to have gotten mixed results, some see.
Yeah, actually, it's not even mixed results. It's that it's a failure because Al Jazeera, they made a test. And actually, so... To understand, when you're on Facebook, if you want to publish an ad, you have some automated ad. It means that you're on your feed and you just need to pay. You just click and then you publish, for example, a visual with a message and it's automatically published. And you have some algorithm who are supposed, to check the country where you send it from. And so from today, you're not supposed to be able to send any ad if you're outside Nigeria. But Al Jazeera, they made a test from Qatar, and they succeeded to send some ads on Facebook, some automated ads. And, they just published some fake news, basically. And it becomes dangerous.
They point out in the article they didn't do it publicly.
No. Yeah, they kept it private,
right.
And it's very important. Yes,
but they proved they were able to.
They were able to do it. So if they did it, anyone could have done it. And
because Facebook said it was going to clean up its act when it comes to how it uses Facebook, and Facebook also the owner of WhatsApp.
Yeah, but you actually to clean, you need to do it manually, and you imagine how many people you need to clean everything, and where it becomes quite dangerous is that there is the frontier between manipulation and information is not very clear, because when you're on Facebook, if you want an ad to be efficient, it has to look like an information. So when you see an ad and when you see information, if you're like a regular web user, you don't see the difference between two of them. So if you publish an ad, people will think it's an information, hence the fake news.
So after Cambridge Analytica, nothing's changed?
Not much. We talk a lot, but...
All right. Another aspect of this election is that late Tuesday, we saw 4 killed on the Borno State governor's convoy coming back from a rally, an ISIS-affiliated offshoot of Boko Haram claiming responsibility for the attack. This was on the road to the regional capital of that northeastern state, Maiduguri, and afterwards, one of the survivors described the scene.
We just saw a Hilux heavily loaded with people in military uniform approaching our vehicle, but thank God we escaped. We then started discussing whether they were military personnel. While others did not agree, it was after we entered the town we learned that they were terrorists.
Catherine Norris-Trent, you went to the Northeast last year.
Yeah, that's right.
That was one of the big pledges 4 years ago.
Absolutely. Buhari came into office saying that he will defeat Boko Haram, and since then he's made various declarations saying the ground war has been won or they've been technically defeated. But from what I saw on the ground and what's clearly the case up there in northeast Nigeria is that Boko Haram or various offshoots are still very much in operation. And they were pushed back. I mean, we have to be fair here. There was a huge military push by the Nigerian army in 2015, and they did drive Boko Haram out of towns and villages where they had been basically ruling the roost. And they pushed them further out towards the border, towards the Lake Chad area, towards the border with Cameroon. But there's still enclaves. The army has to protect enclaves that it's taken back. Boko Haram fighters or the Islamic State of the West African province, one of the offshoots has called itself, they're still very much out there. They're still attacking armed forces. They're still engaging in regular battles. They're still carrying out kidnappings and ambushing there. And reports all the time that they're getting hold of military equipment, military uniforms. There's a lot of questions about the role of the army in a lot of these areas and which side perhaps some of the elements there are on. And the Nigerian state has been very absent in a lot of these very remote, poor areas. And so sometimes you get Boko Haram groups or the Islamic State of West Africa coming in and saying, look, we're not going to kill local people. That's been the tactic, notably, of this Islamic State offshoot, saying we're not going to kill local people. We're just going to attack military targets, government targets, and trying that way to win over the hearts and minds of local people and saying, we will provide you services. They still have a lot of ground. They still have influence.
One final word on this, Patrick Smith. It's not just Boko Haram. This Friday, an alarming story out of Kaduna State. That's in the north of the country. According to the state governor's office, at least 66 killed in a village. The victims include 22 children. He blames, quote, a criminal element. One resident, though, quoted by the Associated Press, saying that he blames it on fighting between Christian farmers and Fulani herdsmen.
Well, that's another factor that's come up since 2015 when Buhari won the election, is these clashes between the herders, predominantly from the Fulani group in the northwest of the country, and the settled farmers in the middle belt. And that's spreading, and parts of Kaduna State are part of that sort of belt of settled farmers. It's quite possible. There's also, as the governor points out, there's a lot of criminal activity in the north. So between the terrorism and this running battle over land resources between the herders and the settled farmers.
Diminishing land resources?
Diminishing land resources, people pushed down south by the environmental degradation, the desertification, the lack of water, and grazing lands for their cattle. All those factors have contributed to sort of social breakdown and a galloping criminalization in some parts of the country. One of the neighboring states, Zamfara, has seen hundreds of people killed in some clashes which are actually Muslim on Muslim clashes, nothing to do with the Christian-Muslim fight. So I think it's a general weakening of security in the north. And again, that could play very badly for Buhari in those elections.
All right, here in France, what goes around seems to be coming around. 10 years ago, during the infant days of Twitter, Young Turks from the media and advertising world opened a private Facebook group to let off steam and thumb their noses at the establishment. It was called the Ligue du LOL, the League of LOL, LOL as in laugh out loud. It quickly turned to very public cyberbullying and real bullying, preying on aspiring, very young, mostly female journalists.
Some of it was completely degrading, like photoshopping my face onto the body of a porn actress in an evocative position. You could feel the malice behind it and a real desire to ruin people.
Silvia Ayuso, what was your reaction to this story?
I was surprised also by the timing, how it came, why now, but it doesn't surprise me on the other hand, because we were after the Me Too, things are changing and people are talking out loud, not just laughing out loud. So, and this is I think that's one more sign that things might be changing and that there's not so much impunity now for these kind of things that a couple of years ago were said like, well, it's just a joke or diminished. Nowadays, it's a real problem. That's a good start, at least, I think.
Aude Baron, what do you make of the timing?
Well, actually, it's the timing, as you were saying, now we are shocked by stuff, and we have to admit that 10 years ago, I was on Twitter, and I know all the people, I know both the victims, I know the journalists who are implied in this scandal. And 10 years ago, we could read some tweets, some messages on Twitter, just, saying that's weird, or it's, it's a bit violent. And today we would say, no, it's not violent. It's just, you cannot do this, and you need to protect yourself. And regarding the timing, actually, it started this summer. And Vincent Glad, you were showing, a screenshot of Vincent Glad, who was one of the creators. He was one of the main activists of the Ligue du LOL, a journalist. And this summer, in an interview, he just talked about Ligue du LOL, and he just, mentioned the group. And it was quite a mistake because
So he's the one who brought it up.
Well, it wasn't. He didn't mean to, but actually, as he quoted it, some victims said, Ligue du LOL, you're talking again about it. And so, it started on Twitter. Some, people started talking about it. And one day, so it wasn't one day, it was 10 days ago, Libération, so the French daily magazine, they have
a fact-check
news, yeah. And actually, they answered a web user who said, what's the Ligue du LOL? Can you just tell us a bit more about it? And it all started from this article.
Yeah, Vincent Glad that you mentioned, he freelancer for Libération newspaper, and he's among a half dozen who've either been suspended or who've even been fired in media and advertising companies. He posted a statement saying it quickly got out of hand and we didn't realize it at the time. Did you realize it at the time that there was this bullying going on?
Well, actually, I didn't know. So the thing is, most people just didn't know. I had no idea. At this time, I was working for a website which is called lepost.fr. I was working, and Vincent Glad was working for 20minutes.fr, and we were both working, on the same topic. And our specialty was social network. And Vincent Glad, by the way, was an excellent journalist. And I think that's why no one knew about it, is because he exactly knew how it worked. So when it's working, how it works, you know the best and the worst. And they knew, he and his friend, how to create, messages without any proofs. And so at that period, actually, if you were not inside the group, because it was a private Facebook group, and when people say, you should have known, how could have we known? Because everything was private. And there were some messages on Twitter, but what I didn't realize is that you could see at that period some messages, some violent messages. But what's shocking is that it's not some messages, it's just an explosion of messages.
How do you explain the cruelty? I mean, you heard that woman explain about her face being photoshopped. You had a crank. It wasn't just a cyber. You had a crank phone call.
And one of
saying for a job interview and then posting it on the web.
And it's not the only thing. Another woman, she had a blog at that period, and she said that one of the guy, she had a sex relationship with him, and he told her that he had AIDS, which was false. You imagine saying to a girl,
why this cruelty?
How can we know? It's just being silly. I don't.
Mob rule, a sort of a mob rule effect, Catherine Norris-Trent?
Yeah, I guess that must be it. I mean, I don't understand, and I'm definitely not going to excuse them, but I would say that I have seen in French newsrooms myself, perhaps some years ago now, very kind of macho humour, very much, a male-dominated environment with white men in quite powerful positions, basically saying whatever they wanted and laughing perhaps at minorities, laughing at women, laughing at gay people. And no one could do anything about it. And then the response is, it's just banter, it's just a laugh, we're just having a bit of fun, saying something completely offensive, then excusing it. And I think there is a problem, maybe even to this day. I mean, we have seen some people apologising, but there's still this thing, we were being childish, we were just playing around, without realising they're powerful white men in a powerful position, and they should not have been doing that. And I don't think there's been that
and I think it's also,
awareness yet.
And I think it's also because, it's just a position, but it comes from anger, comes also very often from frustration. And for example, those guys, I knew them, and I remember very well, 10 years ago, one of the Ligue du LOL, he told me once, because we were seeing each other a lot, every month we had some coffee and everything. So, we just had nice chat. And one of them told me, we can't attack you because you intimidate men. So, and at that period, I just listened saying, so what does it mean? If you don't intimidate, what happens?
So more than 900 journalists this Thursday signing I guess you could call it a petition or an op-ed piece in French newspaper Le Monde to denounce, quote, systematic sexism that is eating away at the profession. Systematic sexism?
I guess yes, like everywhere, but we are very exposed. Like in many other professions, but we given that we are very much more public, maybe we should give more example. Which shows also the difference of mentality, which I think it's a good thing. At least we're way better now. At least we discuss about this. You see that also in comedies, in gags 10 years ago, the impunity with which they were. Also in Spain, they were laughing about beating women. I mean, there were jokes about it. And nowadays they say, how could we say those things? How could we laugh about it? There's been an evolution on that. And I hope it doesn't stop just there, and not just because they got caught, but there should be a real change of mentality that this is not acceptable.
It's become political. The junior minister for gender equality this week suggesting an extension, she said she would talk about it with the justice minister, an extension of the statute of limitation for harassment.
I'm surprised when people say, there are sexist people in politics. Oh, really? There are sexist left-wing journalists? There are sexist people working in cinema and in the industrial cleaning industry? Well, yes, newsflash. We live in a sexist country, in a sexist world and a sexist society.
How different is France from the UK in that regard?
I think it's pretty similar. I mean, in many ways, journalism is under financial pressure and ethical pressure, and the bar is getting lower and lower. I think the good thing is that the one good thing about social media and so on, it's much quicker to expose what's going on. I mean, it's occurred to me as you were talking about it, if a doctor or a surgeon or even a trial lawyer or certainly a judge was heard doing these sorts of things, you'd have a pretty bad reaction to that. I mean, that's somebody with power, direct physical power over your lives and future. And I think we don't take journalism seriously enough in Britain. I think France, you probably take it a bit more seriously. But I mean, the influence of journalists, I think that's what we should be focusing on. That people walking around doing these sorts of things, they're actually writing the news. And how do they apply their ethics when they write the news?
And you heard Marlène Schiappa there. She talked about how these are left-wing journalists.
Yeah. I mean, it's right across the board, isn't it? It's a bit like Brexit.
One final point on this. One of the points that's been raised has been whether or not there should be an end, and this is something that the French president has advocated, an end to anonymity. You should no longer be able to use pseudonyms on social media. Even some of the victims have reacted against that. Aude Baron, is that something that is good or bad, the fact that you can have a pseudonym?
I'm not sure it's a solution, because when you see among the victims and among the guys who harass them, many of them, use their real names. So I'm not pretty sure, that would be a good solution. And, how can you check, that people will always give their real name? So I think, it's more like, for example, you can give example. And just, talking about the systemic sexism, the witnessing of the victims is extremely important, and what happened is really a scandal. So, I don't want any misunderstanding, but I'm a woman, I'm a journalist, I'm working in digital medias. I've been editor-in-chief for now 7 or 8 years, and I have never had any problem. So I think it's important, to that we know what happened, but it's also important to know that sometimes, fortunately, things can be good.
One final word, briefly.
Just we can also be very active on this. I mean, just to praise my newspaper, we have a gender correspondent, and we have discussions among us. There's a lot of women, and we say, hey, listen, have you seen this headline? This is so sexist, and they change it. I mean, we can do a lot of things from inside and coordinate ourselves to fight this from the inside. We have also a role to play on this, not just as victim, but also active.
Silvia Ayuso, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Patrick Smith, Catherine Norris-Trent, Aude Baron. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Simon Harding.
Good evening, François. Good evening, everyone.
I hear there's a national emergency in the United States.
Well, you hear it correctly, François. Of course, the internet reacting en masse to what's been going on in the United States, Donald Trump's confirmation that he will be using a national emergency to receive funds or to use funds for his border war with Mexico. I'm going to take you straight away to this article in CNN, which points to the fact that Mitch McConnell, who's a Republican leader, has just set a hugely dangerous precedent on national emergencies, of course, after he backed Donald Trump's move when the likes of Nancy Pelosi said this would be very detrimental overall to US politics. It's just been a non-stop flow of reactions. This cartoon here saying, I declare a national emergency, but the viewers saying, I declare a national embarrassment. So you can see the reaction, and it's been, I must say, the most dominant reaction on social media, in the press overall. It's people are quite lost for words as to why this is being used for a national emergency, especially at a time when all the figures, facts, statistics point to the fact that immigration is at an all-time low, that violence is at an all-time low on the US-Mexico border. This other cartoon, I think, quite accurately depicts what's about to come for US politics, which is going to be the sparring between Donald Trump, between the White House, the administration, and Democrats in whether it be court cases, whether it be in Congress, and so on. This, again, here, we're hammering out a new deal, of course.
Yeah, because there was that compromise earlier this week
exactly.
between Democrats and Republicans on the budget.
He was offered $1.7 billion, I believe, but Donald Trump said it wasn't enough. And quite funnily, in his press conference, which he held just a few hours ago, he was saying, I could have waited to do this, but I wanted to do it faster, which hints to the fact that perhaps it wasn't a national emergency after all, if he had time to do it. Here's a first reaction from Jeff Merkley, who's a representative from Oregon, saying, being a failed politician who can't persuade Congress or the public or Mexico to pay for your racist war may be a blow to your ego, but it's most certainly not a national emergency. We will see you in court. So
the bad news, though, for people like him is that there's a good chance Donald Trump will win in the courts.
Absolutely, because he says that all the information actually does point in his direction, and of course he has the Supreme Court in his favour where perhaps this might go.
And the terming of what a national emergency is vague.
Very vague, and this is why it's so dangerous and why people are so confused, because there is this idea of a precedent and how it can affect people in the future. I can take you straight away to Brennan Center, which is a non-partisan paper organisation, who say Congress should learn its lesson, gifting presidents with limitless discretion and hoping they won't abuse it. It is taking dangerous risks with our democracy.
The 1976 decision to allow presidents to declare these national emergencies.
Absolutely, and when you see Democrats are now saying, well, the next time we have a president in power, then we'll declare a national emergency on gun laws, on the environment, and so on. So there really is this kind of hit back from the Democrats who are saying, okay, if this goes on, then we can use it in the future.
All right, many thanks for that, Simon Harding. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.